Hi everyone, I'm Karen Sullivan. I am the Communications Director at OPRF and River Forest High School. My teammates are Stephanie Kiesling, Community Member and Board Member for New Moms, Kia Carswell, Community Youth Advocate, Rachel Repper, the CEO of Wonderworks Children's Museum, sorry, I'm nervous. Dawn Simmons, my counterpart, the Communications Coordinator at District 90, and Libby Paul, Board Member for the OPRF Education Foundation.
Hello, my name is Hassani Cannon. I'm a graduating senior from OPRF, and this is my speech from the Apple Scholarship Award. OPRF proclaims itself as a school in which all are welcome with open arms. I remember going to one of the SAFE meetings in my junior year and hearing the stories of mostly black youth, feeling closed off from many of the opportunities the school provides. This isolation is an unfortunate reality for many students of color, especially black youth, and is hazardous to the potential for greatness within all of us. Greatness is to be shared to all, and OPRF can be the vehicle to spread it to those who walk its halls. OPRF is a school of greatness and opportunity that has helped shape me into the person I am today.
So Hassani, like he said, is he's a new graduate now as of Sunday. And I heard Hassani give his full essay at a recent board meeting. The theme of the essay was my vision for OPRF High School. And as Hassani was speaking, what he was expressing really resonated with me and what our team has been working on for this year. Everything he said applied to the broader community. That Oak Park and River Forest villages hold potential for greatness that too often is unrealized because of racial inequities in our community. The vision that Hassani expressed for the high school was really the same as our team's vision for the broader community. That we will become a place where all people of all races have equitable opportunities to reach their full potential. And equitable does not necessarily mean equal, as Stephanie will explain.
Before we go on, Karen, can we move ahead? Thank you. Before we go on, we'd like to define a few terms so that we're all using a common language. Equality, as you can see from our graphic, occurs when everyone gets the same resources. If people begin on unequal footing and each person receives the same resources, they will remain on an unequal footing. Equity, on the other hand, gives everyone the resources they need to succeed, and those resources may be different from person to person. Racial equity, then, is achieved when race is no longer a predictor of life outcomes. The illustration, though, on the very far right is, is left, wherever that is over there, is quite the opposite of racial equity, but it is the reality in our country. The policies in place give unjust power and advantage to those already in power and denies that same power and advantage to those who are at the greatest disadvantage. What I'm describing is institutional racism, also known as structural or systemic racism. The policies, practices, and procedures that work better for white people than for people of color, even if today these policies are unintentional. Institutional racism affects all areas of society, such as education, housing, income and wealth, the criminal justice system, and healthcare. Kia is going to explain some of these issues further.
The Metropolitan Planning Council recently conducted a study on the steep cost all of us pay by living with institutional racism and racial inequity in the Chicago region. Their quantitative study shows the price we all pay as measured in lost income, lives, and education. Here are some of the costs in our region we pay toward education, housing, economics, criminal justice, and health. Like bricks on the wall, policies and practices instituted have stacked up over decades, and individual communities in our entire region are living with the consequences. It will take the same, if not greater, diligence and intentionality from every leader in Oak Park and River Forest village government and institution to undo and correct our past. I'm sure we would all agree that everyone deserves an opportunity to enjoy a rich quality of life, quality education, and to earn a living. Yet not everyone in Oak Park and River Forest have the same pathway to success. For example, Oak Park youth make up about 25% of the population. If we journey cradle through to career through Oak Park's educational institutions, racial inequity glares at us through the data. And we see that how students are tracked dictates their social mobility in life. A few of the English language arts data is shown up here on the screen. When we began the official tracking of third graders, only 19% of African American students meet or exceed expectations. By eighth grade, that number drops to 14%, and by high school, it is a dismal 7%. The racial inequity continues when our youth graduate, where approximately only 40% of African American students earn a 4-year degree within 6 years. Racial inequity follows youth into career, as the median income of African American Oak Parkers is approximately $50K. And we all know how expensive it is to live in Oak Park. Therefore, approximately 50% of that income is set aside for housing alone. This is just a snapshot of how racial inequity plays out in our village. Institutions and equity-focused organizations in Oak Park and River Forest are working towards racial equity, as Rachel will discuss next.
So based on our general experience, we knew that certain groups were already discussing equity in Oak Park and River Forest. But as we got further along in the Leadership Lab program, we specifically discovered more and more groups that were discussing equity in our community. The Community Relations Commission with dinner and dialogues, the Regional Housing Center, Success for All Youth, that's just to name a few. Our specific group journeyed on, and as we spoke with more key people in the community, we saw that there is a groundswell. As we interviewed a number of different groups, we also realized that not only is there a lot of work and effort going into equity, but there is high burnout. There's high burnout. Community members were tuning out. They either thought that this didn't apply to them or that we've already arrived. We asked ourselves this question: if there's so much good work going on and there's high burnout and community apathy, is there a need for a larger movement, a wraparound vision, or perhaps something that told the community who, what, how, and why? So we saw two issues emerging. The broader community may not be engaged, and that there are missed opportunities for coordination. But let's pull back and take a look at this work from the top. In January of this year, the Community Relations Commission presented to the Village Board Governing for Equity. Their report addressed the role of the government with regards to racial equity and presented recommendations and next steps to the Village Board. Terry Kelleher, who was part of the presenting team, said, "These efforts still need help as they are working from the inside, so those on the outside really need to apply pressure. And yet, as we know, progress is slow. But we need greater urgency and public will. Greater urgency is required because we simply cannot leave it any longer. As you heard earlier, we all bear the cost of inequality through lost income, lost potential, and lost lives. Public will is required because racial inequity affects everyone, not just the groups that are marginalized. The entire region will be more prosperous, safer, and healthier if we do the hard work to achieve equity. Earlier, we all bear the cost of inequality through lost income, lost potential, and lost lives. Public will is required because racial inequity affects everyone, not just the groups that are marginalized. The entire region will be more prosperous, safer, and healthier if we do the hard work to achieve equity. And it supports our community-wide values for shared humanity, dignity, and love. We believe we need a common vision and language because the conversation has to be normalized. Right now, race is still a conversation that so many people are uncomfortable to have. We can talk about almost any other civil right except racial equity.
Now, as Rachel noted, common language is critical. As Mark Twain explained, the difference between the almost right word and the right word is the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. In any conversation about race and equity, some terms are used interchangeably, but in reality, those terms may be very different. Equality is not equity, and diversity is not inclusion. Our proposal seeks to increase community buy-in of equity. We propose helping all residents of Oak Park and River Forest to understand and support equity and inclusion. To accomplish this, we recommend two approaches for creating greater urgency and public will. One is creating a petition to support the official adoption of racial equity as an institutional priority across both Oak Park and River Forest. By making it a priority, we mean adopting the recommendations of the Community Relations Committee that was talked about earlier. The goal is to collect more than 4,600 signatures. Now that's 10% of all registered voters in both communities. And we want to do this by the end of this year. Now that deadline is important because it creates the sense of urgency that's so desperately needed. Now an ad hoc equity task force made up of representatives from a collection of key equity groups will oversee the petition process. The petition will encourage elected officials to publicly signify their support to make equity an institutional priority. At the same time, we propose an integrated marketing and communication campaign that will include print, social media, public service announcements, a community reading initiative, podcasts, and on, many other outreach efforts. The goal of this campaign is to ensure that all residents understand what is racial equity and what it isn't. Why is racial equity important? And most importantly, why should everyone care? In the short term, we'll measure our success with the acquisition of those 4,600 signatures. These will be presented to our local elected officials for a formal vote. In the midterm, progress can be quantified by the number of organizations and residents who participate in the outreach efforts of that communications campaign. And in the long term, well, Libby's going to tell you about that.
Thank you, Dawn, for taking us through the short term. In the longer term, we recommend an ad hoc racial equity committee consider creating a more formal group, which we're calling the Collaboration of Racial Equity, or CORE. Its mission would be to keep racial equity at the center, or core, of our community's priorities, adding capacity and focus for racial equity efforts that are occurring across the village. It would specifically create a multi-year, unified strategic plan for equity and would follow the success model created by the Collaboration for Early Childhood, which has a lot of clarity around missions and goals all the way to measuring of impact, which is obviously essential. We don't know yet where CORE would live organizationally. Would SAY's mission expand beyond children? Or would the Housing Center add CORE as a program? These answers to the questions would be determined by the CORE leadership. Let's return to our original vision that began the presentation. We are here as a group to advocate for a vision of Oak Park and River Forest becoming socially just and welcoming communities where all people of all races have equitable opportunities to fulfill their true potentials. It is time, 50 years later, to continue what the 1968 Fair Housing Ordinance started. Racial inequities still exist here, and as we heard from D90 Superintendent Dr. Ed Condon, if we don't do something about this, who can? As a group, we thank the Leadership Lab, all the folks who have participated with us, as well as John and Carrie for their endless, tireless work. Thank you.